All right, it's 10:02 here in Raleigh, so let's kick things off. Welcome to the May 3rd Thursday Web Forum for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or SECAS partnership. As always, I'll be your host, and my name's Hillary Morris. I work on user support and communications for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. And we host this web forum on the third Thursday of every month, right here at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, as an opportunity to share the latest updates on the blueprint, get input and involvement from folks like y'all, and highlight exciting science and success stories in the world of landscape conservation across the Southeast and Caribbean. So here is our usual agenda. I'll start out by introducing our speaker, who will present for 30 to 40 minutes or so. We'll have time for Q&A and discussion at the end, and then I'll wrap up by previewing next month's webinar and sharing a quick update from your SECAS staff. As a heads up, I do record this web forum just for the handful of folks who wanted to attend but had a conflict, and I will post the slides and a link to the recording from the calendar event on the SECAS website and the registration page for this webinar within a couple of days. If you ever have trouble finding that, you're always welcome just to shoot me an email and I'll get you hooked up with that link. Any questions or comments before we move forward? All right, hearing none, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker. Today we're going to be hearing from Jeff Gleason, who's the Gulf Migratory Bird Coordinator with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And later, I believe we're going to be also joined by Randy Wilson, who is the project leader for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Migratory Bird Field Station based in Jackson, Mississippi. And Jeff and Randy are going to be talking to us about efforts to model seabird distribution and abundance in the northern Gulf of Mexico. This data feeds into the brand new Gulf Marine Birds Indicator, which is going to be included in the next update to the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. So with that, Jeff, I will let you take it away.
Very good. Thank you. And the presentation's uploading right now, but yeah, I'm stationed in Florida on Lower Suwannee National Wildlife Refuge, located between Chiefland and Cedar Key. So a little bit of history about this particular project. It started back in 2016, 2017, with actual surveys beginning in 2018. So in essence, the design of the project, there were two fairly distinct research teams associated with each of the survey platforms, that being aerial survey and vessel survey. Randy was the service lead for the aerial survey team, and I was the lead for the vessel survey team. In this slide, the black dashed line boxes represent members of the seabird aerial survey team, whereas the blue dashed line represents seabird aerial survey, the pilot biologist. The gray dashed line represents the seabird vessel survey team, and those individuals identified in red bolded text are basically the analytical support for the respective teams. They provided model-derived summary results and output used in this presentation, as well as in the BOEM final report. The folks identified in italics were primarily associated with or dealt with data management, creating maps and figures that were included in the final report and associated publications. And of course, we'd like to recognize the many individuals that participated in both aerial and vessel surveys. So this project was funded by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they also provided project oversight. There were three components to GoMMAPPS focused on different taxa groups as outlined in the slide. The overarching objective for the seabird component was to collect data on distribution and abundance of seabirds in the Northern Gulf to inform seasonally and spatially explicit density estimates for priority species. The interesting thing, prior to GoMMAPPS, there was very little data for at-sea distribution of seabirds in the Northern Gulf. So just some points of consideration here, sort of Why are seabird data important to BOEM and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? I'm not going to read all these things, of course, but there's a large number of sort of regulatory reasons why these data are needed. In the parentheses at the bottom, O&G represents oil and gas, whereas LNG represents liquefied natural gas. From a service perspective, we're really thinking about what can be done to reduce, minimize, or mitigate unintentional take of listed and non-listed migratory birds associated with proposed federal actions related to energy development. That's helpful. Aerial surveys were conducted via U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Kodiak amphibious aircraft. Vessel surveys were conducted from NOAA vessels of opportunity, and those vessels were dedicated specifically for GoMMAPPS marine mammal surveys, as well as NOAA vessels conducting programmatic annual ichthyoplankton surveys. The red boundary line represents the sampling frame, basically the coastline out to 50 nautical miles for seabird aerial surveys within the Northern Gulf, overlain on the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management planning area boundaries. Within the sampling boundary, the red outline from the previous slide, there were 180 sampling units situated from Brownsville, Texas to the Florida Keys, with 60 in each of the 3 BOEM planning areas. The units were placed from shoreline out to 50 nautical miles. Each survey unit contained 3 flight transects, and in-flight observers counted and identified species when possible they encountered within a 200-meter sampling strip on each side of this aircraft. Surveys were primarily flown winters of 2018 through 2020, with a pilot field season being conducted in the summer of 2017 off the Louisiana coast to compare traditional line transects versus a plot-based design, and to also address potential safety issues or concerns in a high-density oil and gas platform environment. A little bit more on the aerial survey design. This is just basically showing a close-up of a plot with 3 11.5 nautical mile transects flown within each of the survey blocks, spaced 1 nautical mile apart, representing 34.5 nautical miles of transects per survey block. If you multiply 180 survey blocks times that 34.5, if we were able to survey all 180 survey blocks, that's about 6,200 transect miles. The double observer approach was implemented for all aerial surveys, and all observations were independent. Aerial surveys were flown at roughly 200 feet above the sea surface, with birds counted out to 200 meters on it. A bit about the results survey effort. This table represents actual aerial survey effort during this project. As you can see, in some years and seasons, not all survey blocks were able to get surveyed. Winter surveys can be problematic in the Northern Gulf, as many of you know, due to fog and other weather-related issues. Additionally, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service flew plot-based surveys in 20 randomly selected hexagons during summer 2022 and winter 2023 in the Central and Western Gulf in anticipation of proposed offshore wind energy development. So we actually got some additional data in a couple more years. So some additional summary information, some results. These numbers represent totals across the 3 years and 2 seasons. Total, we identified 16 species of seabirds, 24 species of non-marine avifauna. Let's see. Yeah, representing about 48,000 individuals. of which roughly 2/3 were identified to species and 1/3 were assigned either as unidentified or to the next higher taxonomic level, such as gulls and terns. In order, top 5 waterfowl species were redhead, lesser and greater scaup combined, red-breasted merganser, bufflehead, and gadwall. Due to challenges differentiating between lesser and greater scaup, these two species are frequently combined during aerial surveys. In order, the top 5 seabird species were brown pelican, northern gannet, double-crested cormorant, laughing gull, and royal tern. As part of this effort, an assumption was made to classify all cormorants as double-crested cormorants, even though neotropic cormorants are known to occur year-round in the northern Gulf, particularly in coastal habitats west of the Mississippi River in Louisiana and Texas. Not going to get into the modeling per se, but this is sort of what it looks like. Because there were inherent challenges identifying birds to species during low-level aerial surveys, in some cases we were forced to lump or group birds to a higher taxonomic level, as I mentioned previously. There are multiple species of both gulls and terns that breed in the northern Gulf, as well as additional species of each taxa group that overwinter in the Gulf. And these species can be extremely difficult to differentiate in the non-breeding plumage, even from the ground with binoculars. So you can imagine how challenging it could be from the air. In these equations, SST is sea surface temperature, SSH is sea surface height, and SAL is sea surface salinity. Next 4 slides, I'll be presenting results from winter, then summer aerial survey density models. In each, the warmer colors indicate higher densities. The bottom figure. Yeah, parameter estimates are the open circles associated with 95% credible intervals from the negative binomial generalized linear model. Same is true here. This is gulls and terns combined for winter. Brown pelican for the summer. Not surprisingly, the summer results for brown pelican are really lighter colors show up, or warmer colors show up closer to the colonies. Summer gulls and terns, same thing. At this point, I will be transitioning to the seabird vessel survey methods and results, something I'm a little more familiar with. So for vessel surveys, standardized methodology via strip transects were used. We had experienced seabird observers aboard NOAA vessels of opportunity, as mentioned previously. We assessed both horizontal distance to individual birds based on 4 categorical distance bins, as well as 7 categorical flight heights. As mentioned on the previous slide, all data were recorded in real time in program seabird. A bit about the survey effort. 2017, 2018, and 2019, we conducted surveys, roughly almost 42,000 transect kilometers, 2,300 hours of observation effort, representing about 290 days at sea. And as you can tell from the combined footprint of survey effort, we had pretty good coverage overall. This table represents another sort of overview of survey effort between 2 different programs. The GoMMAPPS effort, which was 2018, 2019, 2017, 18, and 19, whereas VSAD was summer 2023 and 2024. So VSAD represents a vessel survey for abundance and distribution. The data continue to expand on available seabird survey vessel data, further building on our fundamental understanding of seabird ecology in the Northern Gulf. Some information on the non-marine avifauna. Detection locations are the points on the figure there, represented all species of non-marine avifauna collected during GoMMAPPS vessel surveys. I would note we are currently in progress on a descriptive manuscript related specifically to observations of non-marine avifauna collected in the Northern Gulf. So some of the species or taxa groups, roughly 1,345 detections, representing about 7,000 individuals, 77 species. Land birds were the most species diverse group, 48 species. Marsh birds, 2 species, raptors 5, shorebirds 10, wading birds 10, and waterfowl 2. For seabirds, roughly 9,300 detections, representing 44,000 individuals of 44 different species. Black terns were the most abundant, followed by sooty terns, laughing gull, royal terns, Audubon shearwaters, currently renamed to Sargasso shearwater, and then northern gannet. Next few slides, I will present some representative seabird species observed during vessel surveys. The species selected should be relatively familiar. Each slide includes species, its relative rank, number of detections, number of birds counted, a figure of spatial distribution of detections, and an associated maxent predictive habitat suitability map. In this case, the black tern was by far the most abundant seabird species observed, and they occurred primarily in nearshore coastal waters with consistent clusters observed near the mouth of Mississippi River and bays to the east, as well as off the Texas coast near Corpus Christi. The species is a migrant that breeds throughout the prairie pothole region, boreal forest, and other areas in the northern U.S. and Canada, with sufficient spatial coverage of preferred wetland types. This species was observed in the Gulf for 7 out of the 10 survey months. The sooty tern was second most abundant. The species tended to occur in deeper continental shelf and off-shelf waters, with large fraction or proportion of detections occurring in the eastern Gulf. So we know there are small numbers of breeders occurring on barrier islands along Louisiana and Texas coast. One of the largest known colonies in the northern Gulf is on the dry Tortugas. Sooty terns employ an obligate facilitative foraging strategy with subsurface predatory fishes like tunas. During mixed species foraging flocks, they tend to occur in a vertical column from the ocean surface upward quite high. Northern gannets were the 6th most abundant seabird species observed. The species tend to occur most frequently in shallower nearshore waters, east and west of the Louisiana Delta, in and near the Mississippi Sound, and in the northern reaches of Appalachia Bay. The species breeds from at least 4 colonies off the coast of Labrador and Newfoundland. They migrate into the northern Gulf after breeding and young have fledged, typically arriving between November and February and departing back north between February and April. Non-breeding age individuals likely arrive later and tend to depart the northern Gulf later than breeding age individuals. Magnificent frigate birds, 10th most abundant seabird species. This species occurred across the entire east-west, north-south footprint of the study area, although concentrations occurred along the north coast of Texas, east and west of the Mississippi River, in and near the Mississippi Sound, and over the Florida Shelf in the southeastern reaches of the eastern planting area. So the bird can frequently be found roosting along the northern Gulf. The closest breeding colony is on the dry Tortugas. For familiar species, brown pelicans, 11 most abundant seabird species we observed. Most observations occurred in the central planting area, with concentrations occurring along and north of the Louisiana Delta, in and around the Mississippi Sound and Mobile Bay, along the central and south coast of Texas, and along the south coast of Florida. Many of the clusters of observations occurred in proximity to known breeding colonies. Some of the observations well offshore may well have represented trans-Gulf migrant individuals or flocks. This species is fairly ubiquitous colonial breeder across much of the northern Gulf where appropriate habitat is present. Black-cap petrel is an ESA listed species, formally listed as endangered by the service in January 2024. Very little was known about its presence in the northern Gulf prior to GoMMAPPS, and GoMMAPPS observations were incorporated in the Species Status Assessment Update version 1.1. Most observations of the species occurred in the eastern planting area, specifically east of DeSoto Canyon and over the Florida Escarpment. Although birds were observed as far west as off the coast of Texas, roughly along the 200-meter isobath. We assume that birds using the northern Gulf enter the Gulf proper via the Florida Straits. So this is a combined MaxEnt model, predictive habitat suitability map for all 24 species of seabirds that met the 20 minimum detection threshold. MaxEnt was used to model seabird vessel survey data with a suite of environmental and habitat variables. Here, the warmer the color, the higher the predicted probability of occurrence. It should be noted, of course, that this is a predictive habitat suitability model and not a density-based model output. So, following up, some additional information we gleaned. The red boxes simply depict relative proportions or percent contribution of seabirds to their expected breeding origins. The northern Gulf is both regionally and globally important for seabirds, and actually a taxonomically diverse suite of migratory bird species. Information related to the project itself, project products, including links to the BOEM final report. We have a USGS project website, as well as the NOAA NCEI websites where the raw data are available. Again, all the project information is publicly available. So just a list of some of the GoMMAPPS seabird related publications to date. We're currently in progress on another manuscript and have another also working its way through the internal formal peer review process. Just want to thank all of the GoMMAPPS seabird project partners. And I'd be happy to take any questions. I think Randy's probably on by now, so if there are any questions, please let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. I saw that we had one question in the chat already about aerial observations, which was already answered by Randy, which I appreciate. Just for the benefit of the recording, Megan was wondering if aerial photos were taken to help with counting or if the counts were just based on observer counts in the moment. And Randy said that all aerial observations were ocular detections. They tested a camera system, but it was inconclusive. The Fish and Wildlife Service has been using high-definition cameras and working to develop some machine learning algorithms to better analyze photos, but that technology was not ready during this survey effort. We do have plenty of time to take some more questions. You're welcome to drop them in the chat. We're a small enough group that if people just want to pop off mute and go ahead and speak up with their questions, that is great too. I'll just go ahead and pause and see what questions folks have.
Hey, Jeff, I appreciate the presentation, very interesting. And so forgive my, lack of understanding, but I'm an engineer, and so my background is not in ecology or biology. But is it my understanding that the non-marine avian birds that were detected in the northern Gulf Coast, is the assumption those birds are migrating or they're going out into the Gulf to feed or something like that. And so they're just passing through that area.
Yeah, pretty much most of the non-marine avifauna that we observed well offshore occurred during the fall, and then the fall and spring migrations, primarily in the fall, but also in the spring. So they're basically migrating across the Gulf. Yeah, most of them.
Yeah, so I'll just chime in. So you notice we did not have that category for the aerial surveys because we were flying from shoreline out. And so we did detect a lot of, quote, non-marine avifauna. So like, egrets and herons, ibis or something, especially down around the Keys. When we got up next to some of those marshes in the bays, we'd pick up some of non-marine birds. We tried to focus primarily on the marine suite of birds.
It just always amazes me to think about some of those small birds flying across the Gulf. It's really amazing. I appreciate the info.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting species from that perspective is the ruby-throated hummingbird. Given how small they are, detecting them from a vessel is pretty crazy. But sure enough, they'd zip by, and you're like, "There's a hummingbird!" Like we're way out, and they're migrating across the Gulf.
That is totally nuts. That is mind-blowingly cool. Okay, I see Brendan's hand. Brendan, go ahead and chime in. We're not hearing your sound, Brendan. I'm not sure why. I can see that you're off mute, but I'm not hearing anything. That's perplexing. All right, Brendan will type that into the chat. Sorry, folks. Teams continues to mystify me, even after many years. We have a question in the chat from Haley about asking if some of the DOIs for the papers that were referenced in your slides, if you would mind dropping those into the chat, that would be a big help. Thank you so much. And then Laurie Rounds asked, were the results, the species and the abundance from the 2023 to 2024 VSAD mission consistent with the expectations from the earlier BOEM surveys?
Yeah, I don't know that we did a major comparison between the GoMMAPPS surveys and VSAD per se. The number of detections of black-capped petrels was one interesting observation. In that GoMMAPPS, we saw them pretty regularly. I think we were up around 21 or 23 detections over a 3-year period. And VSAD, they had just a small number, and I don't think they had any in 2024, which was pretty surprising. So that was a big difference. One of the things we did notice from GoMMAPPS compared to earlier work post-spill in the injury assessment was the number of brown boobies really jumped significantly. I can't remember. They either weren't detected or very small numbers were detected in 2010 and 11 during offshore post-spill injury assessment vessel surveys. And the species was one of the more common during 2017 to 2019. We don't know sort of the reasons or potential reasons why the big influx or increase in brown boobies, but it definitely was a bit of a surprise.
Awesome, thanks. And Brennan has taken the time to type his question into the chat. Thanks for rolling with it. He's been working on a Gulf ecosystem status report for NOAA and is curious if these data can inform longer-term trends. They're always looking for long-term data series that can help assess trends for critical species. And also, is that a whistling duck in Jeff's background?
The easy question, black-bellied whistling duck brood in the background. Yeah, yard birds in Florida back 2018, 2019 when our yard flooded. As part of the Gulf Ecosystem Status Report, I'm happy to discuss, Rainey and I are happy to discuss that sort of offline. Because the data are not collected every year, I think it becomes a little challenging looking at sort of quote unquote long-term trends. But that doesn't mean the data aren't valuable for that effort, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And hopefully Brendan, you see Jeff's and Randy's emails are on the slide. So if you all want to connect maybe via email and continue that conversation, that would be awesome. So what other questions do folks have?
So here, and then I'll just follow up on that last question. So Jeff's probably the better person to contact for that NOAA report. So Jeff, you might want to speak to, you've been involved with NOAA over the last few years and helping to submit some data sets for those reports. And so Jeff got a little bit more familiarity with that exercise than I do. So short way of saying, call Jeff, not me for that one.
Yeah, just to follow up. I worked with Mandy Karnauskas the last time I think that we did a report. I think that was an Gulf ecosystem update a few years back. I worked with her on that. But yeah, I'm more than willing and happy to help you guys on that.
Awesome. And then a question from Shay Davies, who came a little bit late. Would you mind sharing how long your research was collected and what seasons? Was it primarily fall? Just a little recap would be awesome.
Sure. So aerial surveys, summer 2018, winter 2018, winter 2019, winter 2020. First sort of a assessment between survey methodologies, sampling survey methodologies, summer of 2017 off the coast of Louisiana. And then for the vessel surveys, it was pretty opportunistic. We had seabird observers on NOAA vessels spring through winter for some years. I think there was only 2 winter surveys over the entirety. Those were dedicated marine mammal cruises. So most of the data from the seabird vessel side was spring, summer, early fall.
Yeah, so I'll just add in from the aerial side, as Jeff referenced, we did the pilot study in the summer, then we flew 1 complete summer survey early on. And what we learned was that because of the attraction, it was the breeding season and everything was like focused on colonies. So everything was super concentrated on like nesting islands, so to speak. And so the number of offshore detections was pretty minimal. So it was like, well, we're not really getting representative samples if everything kind of being biased by colony locations. And so we kind of made the executive call to focus on the winter period when things would be more distributed at sea.
Sure, that makes sense. When Jeff is really delivering on the request for publications, Haley, that may be, hopefully that's what you needed. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, we have basically a 2-pager, sort of a synopsis with links to all the papers to date and the final report and everything. If anybody's interested in that document, which has all this information in it, just email me and I'm happy to send it to you.
Thank you so much. What other questions do we have for Jeff and Randy?
I'm pausing for a second to see if there's a question. I'm just going to follow up on Jeff's 2-pager. So we've done our best that we can to make data available. So like raw data is available through NOAA and CEI. We've also made some of the data available through the Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird data repository page. And so if you're inside of DOI, you can access that straight up to get there. If you're non-DOI, we have everything loaded also into ServCat, which kind of serves as a backdoor entry to the repository. It doesn't have all the functionality, but you can still access the reports and some of the data summaries. So we've tried to make things as available as possible, given technology and limitations of access and so forth.
Oh, and thanks y'all for prioritizing like data access and getting it in the hands of people. And y'all have been super helpful with our team and figuring out how to wrangle this data for our new indicator, which we're super excited about. So kudos to y'all.
Yep.
Any other questions? We got lots of time, so don't be shy.
Again, just kind of pausing, dragging my feet. But part of me being late was I was on a budgetary discussion that became urgent as about 10 minutes ago. That we, Jeff and I, the Service Migratory Bird Program, are trying to move money to a recipient to basically create a spatial decision support tool of all of the avian data sets, the models that we've compiled over the last, say, 10 years. You know, the GoMMAPPS data, the VSAD data, we have a colony atlas project. We now have a vulnerability risk assessment model. So we're trying to bring all of those data sets together into one platform that would make, you know, user availability much easier. Instead of going to 4 different data platforms, you can go to one place. So we're working a little bit harder to try to make all this available to folks out in the field. So stay tuned on that one.
Oh, I like that question, Shay. Do you have a really cool bird sighting story to share of either individuals or groups? I was already dazzled by the hummingbird story, but if you can top that.
Probably the 2 most unique that I can remember is we had we had an owl land on our vessel. Short-eared owl? Yes, short-eared owl. We were on the Florida shelf, quite a ways offshore, and one of the staff on the crew, one of the crew members actually asked me about it, and he had showed me a picture. He's like, "Yeah, it's perched out here. It's still there." I walked out there, and sure enough, there's a short-eared owl perched on the back of the vessel, on the big frame where the nets go out. That was a pretty unique one. And then we're just north of the dry Tortugas, and we had white-crowned pigeons circle the vessel 2 or 3 times. I was like, "What are you doing out here?" So those are a couple unique ones, but it's not uncommon. It wasn't uncommon on the vessels, where you get up in the morning and go out first thing and start setting up the laptop for seabird surveys, and there'd be, 5, 10, 15 different warblers perched, hopping around on the vessel. So, as you might well imagine, those trans-Gulf migrations are pretty stressful, and a lot of times they just sort of fall out, and they'll roost a little while, and off they go. But yeah, palm warblers were pretty common. American redstarts. These are land birds, of course, that are way offshore. So yeah, you just never know. We had an immature red-footed booby that was on the vessel for almost 4 days. It would forage a little bit, but then would come back to the vessel and spend most of the day just hanging out. And it wasn't until we got cleared down by the dry Tortugas that it actually left the vessel. So it was with us multiple days and nights. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's such a good question, Shay. Thank you for asking that.
Kind of related to that migration and like difficult kind of aspect to the migrations. Are y'all aware of any data that has looked at like the usage of floating marine debris like logs or things like that may exist out in the northern Gulf Coast that those birds might roost on or something? Like, what other options are there out there other than your vessel, when they're out in the middle of the Gulf like that?
Yeah, that's bridal turn. I quickly learned that if you're going to see a bridle tern out in the big ocean, just look for any sort of flotsam. It could be a beach ball, it could be a piece of styrofoam, a little log, anything that floats at the surface. There would typically be one or two bridle terns just sort of hanging out on those floating debris. They're probably the most common. I think some of the like bigger trees after a major rain event or a flood event where you get a big freshwater input out of the mouth of the Mississippi River, that sort of debris, larger stuff, will attract other species. And I think one that sort of jumps out at me would be like cattle egrets and maybe even barn swallows, right? Or even shorebirds might land on it and nest. If it's big enough, they can potentially stop and use it.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Other than that, I mean, the oil and gas platform serve as a major resting loafing area. Through the aerial surveys, I mean, we stayed off of them like 150 meters or so just for safety issues. But when you went by, like every platform would have some flock of roosting birds. Just largely gulls and pelicans, a few terns, but.
Very cool. We have a question in the chat from Megan Lipinski, who is early career, just wondering how you got into this field of work. How did you kind of start off your career in this space?
That's a long story.
I'd say it's an interesting question. Like, where do you even start with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have let's give it 5 minutes.
You could take that one, Randy.
All right, I'll try that one. No, so I guess how I got started. So after undergrad, I was working for a consulting company, had an option to go back to graduate school, which I did. And from that was lucky enough to get in with basically, I started with U.S. Geological Survey out of the old Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, doing basically the same work I did my graduate work on. So it was a very easy transition. And that was looking at songbird nesting, breeding activities in relation to forest management. And so stayed in that arena for a while, probably about 10 years or so. And it's kind of funny how there's like milestones. So I was very happy in that and was doing that until probably Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And then the boss said, "Hey, we need a bird person in the Gulf, tag, you're it." And I've kind of been, quote unquote, stuck in the Gulf ever since 2010. And one thing leads to another. You go from the early assessment into now there's research and monitoring projects going on. And then BOEM says, well, we want to invest some more resources and understand birds and marine mammals and sea turtles. And that was the genesis of GoMMAPPS. And then GoMMAPPS led into the VSAD surveys and additional surveys that the service funded. And so it's just kind of been a perpetual little ball of motion that you get into it and like, well, we did this, so let's do this. It's what else is needed. And it gets us where Jeff and I are today. Like I just made reference, we've got a bunch of data sets that are over the last 10 or 12 years that sit on different platforms. So let's bring them all together and make them all available. So trying to keep that applied aspect, as Fish and Wildlife Service employees in the Migrabird program, we don't really do the research, we facilitate it, but then it's our job to make sure it's very applicable and applied to decision making in those regulatory nexus that Jeff put on his first slide. Like there's a lot of things with MBTA and ESA and so forth that are regulatory decisions or siting, like where's the best place to put oil and gas or wind turbines or aquaculture. And so trying to make the data as applicable as possible. And that's kind of been my strong suit through my whole career, is trying to be that middle person between research, monitoring, and decision making, is that liaison. So
that's up what I stand.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Well, unless anybody else has any burning questions, I may go ahead and wrap us up here, but I'll pause one more time.
So before you close, I'll share my one cool bird story. Being on the aerial side, we were flying aircraft 200 foot off the water. You know, you're at about 100 knots, so you don't get to see things like Jeff does. He's sitting on a vessel and he goes, well, look at the palm warbler. He's got binoculars. But to be at 200 foot coming off of the outer waters, coming into like Laguna Madre, into the bays, and coming across the beach during the winter, January, and thousands of redhead ducks just kind of like scatter. And I remember the first time we did it was on transect. And I asked my pilot if we could stop and turn around and start over. Because like I was just totally blown away. Like I don't know how to count this. I was not expecting 5,000 ducks to get out from underneath the plane. And so it was really nice to see that kind of stuff from the air. All of a sudden it's just like waves of waterfowl getting up. And so that was pretty cool experience.
No, that sounds just incredible. What an amazing view of that. Yeah, I don't think I'd have been able to, I'd have totally forgotten why I was there and what I was doing, just be dazzled.
I was totally like I don't even know where to start my count. Like, you know, we'll start at 5,000, I guess. I don't know. Like,
it's a lot of ducks.
Luckily, that was one that we had decided early on that there was like an ordinal scale in some of the counting. Like, we weren't worried about if it was 2,992. It was like if you were more than 1,000, you went into that bin. So luckily, it didn't matter that I had exact counts, and so otherwise I would have really screwed up the data set that day. So.
Takes the pressure off a little bit.
Exactly.
Well, thanks y'all so much for this fantastic presentation. Jeff, did you want to chime in here?
I was just going to say, to sort of follow up on that, most of the time from a vessel, it's a pretty big vessel, and it's about 12 to 15 meters where the observation deck is, where we're doing bird surveys, and we're entering data as we go real time. But typically it's pretty low. You got plenty of time most of the time until you hit a foraging aggregation, mixed species foraging aggregation of seabirds, where you might have, say 100, but multiple species, right? And so at that point, it can be a little stressful, like Randy said, like, okay, you sort of hierarchy, right? We got 10 frigate birds high, and you just start mentally working your way down to the sea surface. And fortunately, we typically had a data entry person at the laptop, and you're calling out the species and number. And what they do, the software we use allows you to basically copy basically the record other than the species, right? Duplicate records. So he'll ask, or the person might ask, how many species? And I'll say 10. So they create 10 records, and then we can backfill them. So the observer is keeping track of what species and how many, and trying to get all the information relative to that while the data recorder was entering data. So those were fairly infrequent, but when they happened, it was chaos. Yeah.
I can imagine. Well, thanks for these insights into the sampling process. This has been awesome. Fantastic presentation. Really appreciate the data and the stories and your willingness to share. So I'm going to very briefly take back the sharing just to wrap up with a preview of next month's webinar, so you all know what to expect if you join us next month. Next month, we are going to have a little bit of an unusual web forum where you're going to actually have an opportunity to actively participate and share some feedback on where the staff of the SECAS partnership are prioritizing their time. SECAS has been through some disruption and some loss of capacity over the last year. And so we're trying to take this opportunity just to get a little bit of a gut check from the broader web community about whether we're prioritizing the right things with our more limited time, get some input on how we balance our time around improving, supporting, and promoting the partnership and its products, some trade-offs around the revision cycle for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint, the staff time that we invest in that, but how quickly we're able to turn around data updates and respond to user feedback, and then also get some input on the format and how frequently we seek feedback on the blueprint, whether it's through workshops or through other pathways. So just a little bit of a snapshot of what we'll be talking about next month. That's June 18th at 10 a.m. Eastern. And my Teams is not allowing me to share chats right now, which is something that it does periodically. I don't know if someone on the SECAS team would be able to drop a link to next month's webinar in the chat while mine is acting up. I would really appreciate that. I usually have to reboot to get it reconnected. So other than that, the other thing I wanted to share was some indicator updates that we have queued up for the next update to the Southeast Conservation Blueprint, which we are planning to release this fall. That will be Blueprint 2026. And so I will hand things off to Rua just to give a quick summary of what you can expect, including this Gulf marine birds indicator that will be fed by Jeff's data. Rua, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and then I dropped a link to the next event in the chat for anyone who wants to go sign up for that one. But yeah, got lots of fun updates for this year, including new Gulf marine bird indicator based on the stuff that Randy and Jeff have been talking about. So super excited to be able to incorporate that information. We also have a Caribbean imperiled aquatic species indicator, thanks to integrating a whole bunch of freshwater aquatic species data. For that one, super excited to get some more stuff in the Caribbean as always. And then we also have 3 other improved indicators. We had a big overhaul of our fire frequency indicator. So now it actually looks at kind of how often something's going to be burned and how often it should be burning and how far that fire history has departed from that class. So you can see, hey, are we relatively on track? Are we way off track? Should we be burning regularly and we haven't been burned in a long time? So that's been a big update from just how often it's burned. And then we refreshed our imperiled mammal and our imperiled reptile and amphibians indicator to use the more recent land cover data. So both of those are also coming up for new data. And so all that stuff will be out basically later this year, released with the larger Southeast Conservation Blueprint. And lots of fun. That'll also be integrated in all the fun viewers, so you can play around with it with all the different documentation and gory details and codes y'all are used to seeing for anything in the blueprint.
Thanks so much, Rua. Yeah, we're really excited about these improvements and hope that they will be useful to you as we keep improving the blueprint over time. So I would like to end on this slide, how to get more involved in SECAS. An easy way is to sign up for the SECAS newsletter, which you can do on the footer of any page of our website, secassoutheast.org. That will subscribe you to our monthly newsletter and a once monthly reminder about this web forum. So we won't blow up your inbox, just 2 emails a month. That way you never miss a topic that you're interested in for the webinars or an opportunity to get more involved in the blueprint by serving on an indicator team, attending a workshop, or other opportunities to participate in the partnership. Please check out our staff page and connect with your staff. We would love to help you, especially if you're interested in using the Southeast Conservation Blueprint in your work, or if you have feedback on how we can improve it. We have dedicated staff available to assist for free with things like writing letters of support for grants or contributing to proposals or wrangling data to help inform conservation plans or decisions that you might be wrestling with. And then in that spirit, definitely encourage you to check out the blueprint at secassoutheast.org/blueprint. We have a number of online viewers where you can explore the data, and we would love to hear how it is working for you. So that is all I have. So I'm going to pause again to see if anyone has questions for Jeff or Randy or for me or Rua or anyone else with your SECAS staff. Not hearing any, all remains for me to just say thank you so much, Jeff and Randy, for this fantastic presentation. Thank you all for joining us this month, and we hope that we will see you in June for this opportunity to weigh in on where SECAS is focusing. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your week, a great Memorial Day weekend, and hopefully we will see you next month. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.